Okay, so this is my review of the season finale of Defending Jacob After. This is, like the whole series, directed by Morton Tildum and written by Mark Bombach. So this episode does a lot visually, and it sets up another story that we're used to seeing in this show where we get good news in the beginning and then it just goes sour fast. And it's shown visually by having this sunrise open the episode in the barber house, and they're about to get this great news that Leonard Patz has admitted his guilt, which we saw at the last episode. And you think now, okay, they're getting a big win. They declare Jacob's a free man, but we'll see is that there's more to that news than is on the surface. And what I talk about visually is that later on when they're in Mexico, you'll see there's a big shot where the sun is coming down and Andy's standing there. And it's really just showing you that it's come full circle now, where it opens with them getting another win, and then everything's about to hit the fan in Mexico right when that sun goes down and just into darkness, where it ends with Andy. It's interesting because when the Barber family is in this parking garage, they're thinking they're just going home free now. A little reminder comes in Ben's father, who says, Jacob, you still definitely did this, but that reveals Father O'Leary coming in, and we see that he was watching the Barber family. But it's so interesting, these little faces that Michelle Dockery makes, that even when the father of Ben mentions Jacob doing it, she gets that fear again just clicking in. There's still something off and she senses it. And some great narration from the future timeline, which we'll eventually get to by the end of the episode, to make it the current timeline. But when Andy says to Neil that there was no normal, it was just before and after, title of the episode. And we're seeing that after of the whole trial with Jacob. And there's some really important lines here. One in particular is when Laurie says to Andy in bed that she's just shocked at herself that she thought her son actually did this, and that she had this guilty feeling of being relieved because at least she knew, and that she couldn't believe that a mother would think that of her child. But unfortunately, as we see for Laurie, she will go instantly back into that mindset shortly in this episode. So where the tide starts to shift is when Andy sees his old boss, and she informs him that, oh, they just wrapped the Patz investigation finally. He thought it was already wrapped, so he's like, why'd it take so long? And she's like, oh, some things weren't adding up. This immediately plants a seed of doubt into Andy, and now he's got to face a fear he doesn't want to even look at, the thought of that, oh my God, this O'Leary fellow actually killed Leonard Patz. So who does he go to see? His father, who clearly hired O'Leary. And we get this great scene between J.K. Simmons and Chris Evans here, probably their best scene together this season. And there's a lot going on here where J.K. Simmons is basically around the bush admitting that he did set up this murder, but he's saying, look, your grandson's free. I don't care if he did it or not. I'm protecting him from a life in this prison. You should be happy. And he has the best line of this scene where he says, you have the choice now to be a good man or a good father. And it seems like Andy, this whole show, has always chosen the path of questionably good father, but not good man. I mean, he knows that about a murder now with Leonard Patz and what really went on, and he continues to hold it in and lie to protect Jacob. The problem is with Andy doing this is every time he tries to protect his family, he screws them over more. And that really happens with Laurie. And you see, Laurie mentions to Andy, we agreed, no more secrets. And then she asks him about, oh, you seem off. What's wrong with you? And Andy's like, oh, I just got a lot on my mind. The career and the move. So it's like, again, just constantly lying. He can never open up to Laurie. It's the miscommunication that causes so much tragedy in this show. If only he would just tell her about this information he got earlier on, then maybe we don't get such a crazy reaction from Laurie later on. So this episode started a little slow, but it really kicked up when things go actually to Mexico, which I didn't even expect us to get to a totally different change of scenery. I mean, this whole show, we've been in that bleak town they're in, but now it's like, wow, everything's colorful. Everything seems happy for this family. And then you start to worry as an audience member when you see Jacob gets recognized by this girl, Hope, and they keep making a point of Laurie pointing out, like, oh, look, they're getting along. And you're like, oh no, like, what is Jacob going to do here? And when it gets terrifying, just as the audience member and you having this information like Andy does about Patz to add doubt about Jacob, it really is scary when Jacob comes home early from this party where he's supposed to still be out with Hope, and he says to Laurie and Andy that he hates drunk idiots, he didn't like the party, and it's that behavior that's scary by Jacob. And the director does such a good job with little moments of framing the camera, and especially when Jacob says this, he does like a close-up, but it's off kilter. He always does that when Jacob has these like psychotic lines a bit and hints at what's going on and what turmoil is in that head of his, and it all leads to that bowling ball behavior where he's holding it up, this violence that they're just kind of giving you with him. But it's really, for us as the audience and Andy and Laurie, a red herring. Now, that differentiates from the book's ending. I looked this up. I didn't actually read the book, but I read the Wikipedia. I'm not going to spoil the book ending, but that's where it's a little different. There is the girl Hope, but they handle it differently. Check out the book if you want to hear that ending, or just look up Wikipedia. But I liked that the show went a different angle. Just giving it a different taste than the book is always good, making it have a little bit of its own voice, and they did that with the ending here. And I think that what's really interesting is that Neil in the future timeline saying to Andy that, hey, like, no way, like, you guys didn't doubt Jacob at this point. But Andy continues to lie, and he does this to protect his family. And he's saying, oh no, like, Laurie, she didn't think he was guilty either at this point. We both didn't. But we're seeing a scene where he's crying outside, is completely doubting Jacob, and Laurie's completely on, okay, this means my son's not innocent again because now I know O'Leary killed Pat. And what Michelle Dockery does great in that moment is, like, the second she finds out information about Pat, her face completely gets broken again. Like, all this old anxieties, as Neil said, that she had really does come back to the surface in that moment. It was like it was all in limbo for a second, and now it's back. And you see when Laurie gets home and she's laying down at night, all she's doing is replaying this Job story in her head that Jacob put online, and she's also thinking of thoughts she had that she's guilty too and causing this murder. So she has a mix of guilt, a mix of terror that her child is this psychotic person, murderer, and it's just now hitting full steam ahead in Laurie's complete breakdown that's been just set up this whole season really well. And they do really good shots here too. I in particular thought it was so important to have little moments like she had in the kitchen where she looks at Jacob, thinks of the bowling ball incident again, thinks of the knife, and the way Jaeden Martell just looks up at her with that face. He's really perfectly cast visually too, because he's a perfect mix of just an innocent type face, but also a deviant type face. So it really, as an audience member, makes you view him like Laurie does, and you just don't know what the hell to think. So the night before the big scene with Laurie and Jacob, you see that Andy and Jacob are playing Othello. And it's crazy because we've seen Othello a couple times in the show being played. It was actually a big hint towards the ending of this show, because Laurie has her Othello moment when she tries to kill somebody and then tries to also kill herself. The difference is Othello is successful in this, where Laurie is not. And like a Shakespeare story in Othello, this is a tragic ending. And what makes it so tragic is this night before the big incident in the car crash, Laurie was leaving the house to tell the Rifkins what really happened with Pat, to do the right thing, and she didn't, because she kind of just got cold feet and freaked out seeing the wife just a complete mess, and she goes the other route of just violence and ending her life and killing who she thinks is a murderer in her own son. And what's tragic about that is because Laurie, before this big moment, is the most innocent. She is the true victim of this whole story until this last moment. And it's like all the bad deeds, from Andy's lying to Jacob's just also lying and not being truthful. You feel horrible for her, and it leads her to snapping and doing pretty much the worst deed of all. And what's crazy is, you know, Jacob didn't get the murder gene because you get it from your mother, but maybe that science is off completely, because his mom is capable of murder, we find out. So that's really interesting to look at too. And also to just keep in mind too, did Jacob really do it? I think clearly he did at this point, but that's still even up for discussion. And I love how they shot this scene with the car, because I love it cut back and forth between Laurie driving Jacob, but then Andy finding in the garbage Jacob's baby book. So that was the big hint to Andy, like, oh crap. And it's also showing you that he knew Laurie's true intentions here, and that he would still deny that in court to Neil, because again, he's a masterful liar. So the big important thing you have to understand about Laurie's intentions here and her character and what's really driving her mad is more actually the fact of just not believing she's getting the truth from anyone. And to have the two main people in her life, her son and her husband, thinking they just constantly lie to her and feeling like a ghost, as Andy even calls her in this episode, you see she's an important line where she's like, I just want the truth, Jacob. Did you kill him? And when she's almost there, about to kill them herself, Jacob literally says, I killed him. And then she goes, you did? And that's when she actually comes back to like normal and out of the crazy mode. But then when he says, sure, if it'll make you slow down, that was it again. Back into what's really driving her nuts is she's not getting the truth. She feels like she's just being toyed with, and that was it. It's almost like if Jacob just said it that way, this would have never happened. But maybe Laurie is totally in the wrong here. Maybe Jacob is innocent and he just comes off as someone who's lying. And that's built as mistrust from Andy. And that's where I think you can argue that Andy is the most evil person in this show. I think he's got award for causing most tragedy in this, and he never learns. It's a heartbreaking scene. Michelle Dockery, as she has this whole series, just stealing the show at this point. Her saying the line, I love you, I love your father. And then when she just turns, I was shocked. I didn't think it was actually going to happen. And then you get the big reveal that when we get to the future timeline is now the current timeline, that it was actually Laurie on trial now. And that's where Andy is speaking in front of the jury to Neil. And that Andy's just lying the whole way through like he always does to get Laurie out of that she would be convicted of murder. And it's ironic lines from Neil here saying now, but Jacob is owed justice. So that's Neil in a nutshell too. It's about, for him, it's always justice, justice, justice. And that now it doesn't matter that Jacob's on his side now of the case. He still just wants justice no matter who's involved. He is all of the law completely. And he actually, hindsight now, has been right most of the way here. And even though he's been painted as the villain, he's also talking the most sense. And he's totally calling everything out to Andy accurately about Laurie and Jacob. But the only thing he says wrong is he says, no one blames you, Andy, you're a victim. But that isn't further from the truth, we know. Andy is not the victim in this story. I just argue that if Andy was truthful with Laurie, so much of this could have been avoided. And we see as a character and character growth, Andy had zero character growth. And that was on purpose, and that worked. Like, it's just showing you that tragedy of this man cannot change his ways, and that just in his blood. Like his crazy, murderous father, that he's just causing awful things around him because he's got these sociopathic tendencies. And Laurie is decided that she was in an accident and that she didn't cause this on purpose by the jury. And you see it's a little different reaction than Andy as it was with Jacob getting cleared, because Andy at this point is really just numb now. And that amount of lying, that amount of denial, and hiding things deep down can still get to you. That's why he's drinking so heavy. And it's just interesting when Laurie wakes up, she doesn't remember exactly what happened, because she says, what if when Jacob wakes up from his coma, he thinks I tried to kill him, which is actually what happened. She doesn't remember. And he's like, hey, it was just an accident. Andy's way of handling things, and he knows that's not the truth deep down. And it's so ironic too, because if you look at Laurie's biggest mistake, arguably, is that if Jacob was innocent and didn't kill Ben, she never believed in her son anymore. And that now she's thinking, oh my God, what if my son thinks I tried to kill him? But actually Jacob would be right. I know it's a lot, but it's just crazy that came full circle, and that worked really well. And I take the ending as, Andy comes home, he's alone in the dark in his house. Then he's on Jacob's bed and he's just eating alone and he's somber. And this is a man who's just really sitting in something that he's kind of deserved. And that's what happens when you live this life of just complete lying and not facing any truths and hurting others in the process. You can end up alone like this and just wallow in your denial. And it's pure tragedy here. And now his wife and son are in the hospital. His son might not even make it alive, but he got what he wanted, where they're both cleared, and he's still not happy. So it's clearly not the answer in lying, and that just hurting others will just lead to your downfall eventually. That's what I believe moral of the story is. So for me, the finale, obviously, it's really hard to live up to penultimate episodes like last week's. It was so good, especially because it was the trial. This episode went down a little bit for me, but I think it was a solid ending. I'm going to give it a 9.1. But like all endings, I think some people are going to really hate this. I think some people will really like it. I think you'll appreciate it more if you realize it's more just grounded in truth and it is a tragedy, and that it really was earned. It was earned because the story really came down to Laurie. And it was earned in the sense of Laurie's character transition from someone who had it together and then slowly was losing her mind as the true victim of the story by Andy's decisions. And it was interesting seeing Andy's decisions not change and cause so much tragedy and what happens when people don't try to be better. And I think that's really important, that it was so successful in this season. And this season had some really good writing, great directing, and great acting. I love this cast. I'm actually going to miss watching the show. It was a surprise for me how good it was. So as a whole, I'm also giving this season a 9.1, and it would be higher. I thought the last couple episodes were excellent, but I thought the first 3 were a little slow out of the gate. Wasn't that interesting, and then it really kicked up. So 9.1 I think is fair. Let me know down below what you thought of this episode and what you thought of the season as a whole. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment, try to respond as many as I can. Please make sure to subscribe. I can use all the help I can get. It really helps when you guys do that. If you could put notifications on so you don't miss any of my reviews. I'm doing a bunch of shows down the pipeline, so stay with me. I also do celebrity interviews, so you don't want to miss that. And please follow me at SteveVarley1 on Twitter and Instagram for more of me. And I'll see you next time.